is Alex. I work at a private company in the city of California. You could say I'm a man living far from home, as I've been here for 2 years now. In California, I live in a house that was passed down from my grandmother. And tonight I'm going to tell you about an experience I'll never forget. Believe it or not, this really happened to me. That day, because of the amount of work from my boss, I had to work overtime to finish tasks that needed to be submitted the next morning. The office was very quiet that night. It was just me and the security guard outside. On top of that, it was raining heavily, which made it hard for me to focus on finishing my deadline, even though it had to be done by tomorrow. Eventually, the rain stopped. It was late into the night, and finally, I finished all my tasks. I quickly tidied up my desk and headed to the parking lot to drive home, feeling drowsy. I said goodbye to Mr. Smith, the security guard on duty that night. As I drove home, I noticed the streets were deserted, with only a few cars passing by. It was almost midnight, and the heavy rain from earlier must have kept people off the roads. I drove quickly, listening to the radio. When I stopped at a red light, the radio in my car suddenly died. Why did it stop working? I thought. Not long after, I was startled by a woman with long hair knocking on my car window. I saw her in my rearview mirror. She was wearing a flower-patterned dress and looked like she was crazy. She kept knocking on my window, staring blankly at me. I ignored her and pretended not to see until eventually she walked away. How weird, a crazy person wandering around at this hour, I thought. Don't they have anything better to do? Well, of course, crazy people don't have work. When the light turned green, I quickly drove home. When I got home, I immediately went to my room to clean up. I saw that it was almost 1 a.m. The work at the office had really worn me out. And after freshening up, I lay down on my bed, ready to sleep. But just as I closed my eyes, my phone rang. Who's calling at this hour? I checked, and it was my girlfriend. Hello, yes, I've finished work. I just got home, thank you. I'm really tired. Just as I was speaking, the call was suddenly cut off. I figured it must have been a signal issue from the earlier heavy rain, so I didn't think much of it and put my phone down. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I was abruptly awakened in the middle of the night. My throat felt dry, and even though I was still very sleepy, I got up to get some water from the kitchen. As I got out of bed and walked toward the door, I saw, reflected on the wall of my room, a large dark shadow following me, hovering right above my shoulders. I was fully awake now, and terrified. I ran out of the room to escape the shadow. But no matter how fast I ran, it followed me. I stopped at the corner of the room outside my bedroom, paralyzed with fear as the shadow grew larger and closer. My heart was racing. I could only pray and scream for help. The shadow continued to grow until it turned into a massive figure. What is this? I thought as the figure came even closer. Just as it was about to reach me, I woke up. It had all been a nightmare. I breathed a sigh of relief, but my heart was still pounding, and I was drenched in sweat. Still thirsty and hot, I went to the kitchen to get some water. As I was drinking, I felt like someone was watching me from behind. I put my glass down and slowly turned around. To my horror, standing there was the same woman I had seen on the road earlier, with her back to me. Is this another dream? I thought, trying to make sure I was really awake. But no, this wasn't a dream. I was fully conscious. The woman with long hair and a tattered flower-patterned dress was standing with her back toward me. I stepped back slowly, trying to run, but it felt like my legs were too heavy to move. As she swayed, I gathered enough courage to ask, "Who are you?" No response. I asked again, "Who are you?" Slowly, the woman began to turn around, revealing her face. It was mangled and covered in blood. My skin crawled with fear and cold sweat began to pour down my back. I realized then that this wasn't a human being. As the woman drew closer, I saw her face and head were severely damaged, and her eyes were dripping with blood. Panicked, I screamed and tried to run back to my room. When I finally could move my legs again, I dashed to grab my car keys and immediately drove to a friend's house. Once I had driven far enough from my house, I began to feel a little calmer. But the image of the long-haired woman in the flower-patterned dress was still vivid in my mind. My journey was interrupted when I came across several stopped cars. There was an ambulance and a police car on the side of the road. I rolled down my window and asked the police what had happened. They explained that there had been a car accident. A car had crashed into the road barrier and someone had died. As I drove past the accident, I was shocked to see the victim being carried into the ambulance. The victim was wearing the same flower-patterned dress as the woman I had seen earlier. I gasped and continued driving, now deep in thought. Was the woman I had seen the victim of this accident? I was speechless and in tears. Ever since that night, I've been too scared to go home alone late at night.